Good morning again. 2 minutes have passed. It is time. We're going to kick off the Android Summit 2017. Woo! A huge thank you to everybody that's here. We're just super excited to have you this year's event. Our event team has been working very hard since January, and a lot has gone into making this event really, really great and awesome for you. So just excited that you're here and hope you have an awesome time. Boom. All right. Actually, I'm not going to do that quite yet. Quick curiosity, show of hands. How many folks were at the Android Summit 2016? Awesome. Okay. Thank you for coming back. And all the new folks that are here this year, that's really awesome. Love to see the new faces. Alrighty. So I want to touch a few bit of logistics, and then I'm going to get out of your way because you're certainly not here to hear me talk. There was 0 tweets about this guy standing up here, so I won't put you through that for too long. All right, so you had registration this morning. You came in, which is awesome. For those that have conference tickets but not workshop tickets, you don't need to register tomorrow. You just come on in to the dev talks. But for those that have the workshop tickets, we would like you to actually go through registration again, just so that we have you logged in and checked in and we know that you're here. So if you don't mind to do that, we appreciate it. Okay, this one's super important, and a huge shout out to Chuki Chan, who I don't think is here this year. When we were doing our first Android Summit, she was our keynote speaker that year. And she went to our website and said, "This looks amazing. Where's your code of conduct?" And I was like, "What's that? What do you mean?" And so I got educated very fast. And it's awesome. So we grabbed the code of conduct. We might even have grabbed it from DroidCon New York. Kevin, thank you very much. But it's really important that everybody here know that we are here to make this an amazing and awesome event for everybody. So what's awesome about Android is, be together, not the same. So all of us are unique, all of us are different, and we all bring something special to the event with our experience and with our thoughts and the things that interest us and that we're passionate about. So free to share them and just receive everyone openly and well. If for some reason, and I know this never happens, there's any kind of issue at all, grab one of us in the blue shirts, and we'll talk a little bit more about the blue shirts in a bit. But we're here to make this as awesome and just great time for everybody. So hopefully you all checked the box at least when you registered. So hopefully you actually did read the code of conduct and not just check the box. Boom. Okay. So this is one of my favorite ones to mention each year. So we have 3 tracks, right? We have our design track, our test track, and our development track. And we're really excited to have all 3 of these tracks and just great topics and speakers for each of them. But what I'd like to encourage folks is if you're a developer, take a look at the other schedules. If you're a tester, take a look at the other schedules, and same with the designers. It's great to take advantage and just look across the breadth of speakers and topics and expose yourself to things that maybe you don't know as well, want to get a little bit more of a deeper look at, and just expand beyond your current area of focus. So don't hesitate to do that. It's a really good way to take advantage of what the conference has to offer. Okay, this one I'm going to need Toria's help on. There are certain logistics. Everybody have Android Summit app? Have you grabbed it yet? Okay, I'll talk about that a little bit more. This full schedule is there. Obviously, the full schedule is also on our website. So we're going to do this little kickoff, and then we're going to immediately get to the awesome stuff, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We will have lunch at, what time, Toria? 12? Okay. Lunch at 12. Lunch is going to be served. Day 1 is the only interesting day, I guess, from a logistics perspective. We'll be upstairs, and there's a beautiful ballroom area where we're going to be having lunch. And we've really worked hard this year to make sure it's super efficient to get people through the lines, get their food, and just be able to sit and enjoy and talk with each other and eat. So we have signs out there. Again, event staff will be out there to help you as well if you're kind of unsure where to go. But it's kind of out this door over to the left, and then there are elevators going up to the 2nd floor. There are also a set of steps going up to the 2nd floor. After that, more talks, right? And then there's a few more things coming up, which I will mention. Okay. If you don't have the Android Summit app yet, I always put this slide up because we had to put both words together in order to make this work. So search on Android Summit, one word. If you search on it at two words, I think it's actually a lot harder to find the app that way. So put one word together, or the two words together, search on that, download it, install it. It's a great app. Again, we've had just a huge shout out. I don't know if the teams here that put the app together, but they did a great job of updating last year's app. They're using Firebase this year and all the cool stuff. So enjoy. Boom, okay. Prizes. So after the talks today, we'll be having a reception literally right outside of this room where you were having the Continental Breakfast this morning. We will all get together, and it's just a great opportunity after a day of talks to just kind of mix and mingle. I certainly encourage folks to take advantage of that. Find people you don't know. Reach out, it's easy for us, especially after a long day, we're kind of tired, just kind of come to our comfort circles, but this is such a great community of people. I just invite you to go up to somebody you don't know, say hello, introduce yourself, and get to know them a bit. Towards the end of the reception, we'll be doing drawings. You should have been getting tickets when you were registering, and we have some very, very cool prizes to give away. I'm not going to say what they are. But they're really nice. So, you'll have to be present to win, which is our thing all the time, and it's really just us encouraging folks to be there for the reception and enjoy that time together. So hopefully you're there, and good luck to you all. Okay, something cool this year. If you're into RX Java and you want to understand how to use that to do reactive programming for Android, Chris and Angus were kind enough to provide the Android Summit a discount this year on their book that they published. So when the conference is over, you'll get an email with a code and a link. This is my attempt at making it look like the book is half price, so it broke in half. Anyway. I'm sorry, all the designers in the room, you can all cringe, and I'm not a designer, clearly. So we'll send you out a code and a link. The two of these guys have done a tremendous amount of work putting a great book together, and it's just one more thing that we want to offer you when the conference is over. All right, tweeting. So before I actually picked up the mic and turned it on the second time, I took a picture and tweeted out it's go time because pictures or it didn't happen, right? So feel free, please, tweet your experience of the event. Use the hashtag Android Summit 2017. You all know how this works at this point. But just, we love to hear and see all of the thoughts and activities, your reactions to the talks and just, interesting things that you pick up. Just share it out because other folks that aren't here will benefit from that. And we just love to see your chatter. Okay. Have you all looked inside your bags yet, by chance? Okay, so there's some cool stuff in there, right? I already talked to the speakers last night and apologized to them ahead of time. And I also gave them authority to take these away from you. If you're in the talks, speakers have worked super hard. We trust that you will all know that these are great, fun toys. We're really excited. Tori, great find in getting these. Just don't use them during the talks. Speakers worked very hard. So anyway, with great power comes great responsibility, or maybe with great fun comes great responsibility. I don't know. But enjoy them after the conference. Event staff. So the shirt that I'm wearing, you'll see a bunch of folks in identical shirts. We are here to make this experience as awesome as possible for all of you. So anything that you need, any concerns, any problems, you name it, like just something that can make the experience better for you today, you grab us. We'll have a huge smile on our face, and we'll be really excited to help you out. So do not hesitate to grab us for anything. We're here for you. And last but not least, it's definitely important to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of what happens to make this conference work. Capital One is our singular sponsor, and they, like everything that you see, we have an amazing team and everything, but it wouldn't happen without that backing. So we're truly grateful to Capital One. A lot of us do work there, and I'll I'm one of them. And it's important to mention that we do have a lot of Android engineering roles open right now. So if there are folks that are excited about what they see and excited about Capital One's presence and what we're doing in the engineering space and just from a digital journey perspective, just talk to any one of us in blue shirts. We're happy to share that with you as well. And one of the most exciting things I think about the Capital One sponsorship is going to the far right of the slide. All of the money that is raised through this conference, so your registration fees go directly, every penny go directly to Women Who Code. So this year we raised $6,000 directly going to Women Who Code. So thank you all very much for that. And I just wanted to give a shout out to our partners. So these are folks that help us get the word out in the local community. So the MoDev group, thank you. GDG DC, thank you. And DC Android, thank you as well. And with that, I am going to have Jared Sheehan, who is our dev track lead, come up and introduce our keynote.
Thank you, Mike. First off, I want to say thank you very much to Michael and Toria. They're really our leaders for the Android Summit, and we wouldn't be here without those two people. So, Toria, you want to stand up really quick? Are you over there?
She's right there.
There she is. All right, thank you very much. So as everybody knows, Kelly Shuster is our keynote speaker today. She really fits all of the criteria that we look for when it comes to a keynote speaker for Android Summit. She's a leader in the community. She's an advocate for pretty much everything technology and for underrepresented groups. A number of years ago, way long ago, I worked on the AOL Instant Messenger mobile application. And I remember we spent about a year redesigning the whole thing and working really hard, pouring blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. And we launched it, and there was a low vision user who reached out to me on Twitter. We had a user who knew. And he was not very happy with the fact that we hadn't included any accessibility-related features that would support him. And he was quite upset. And it really made an impact on me. It made me realize how important accessibility really can be. I met Kelly last year, physically anyway, at DroidCon New York. And she gave the keynote, and it was about Android is for everyone. And she went through why it is so important to make sure that we support all of our users. And it really hit home because I had had some interactions in the past that really made me realize that we needed to do this, and she felt exactly the same. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Kelly Shuster, our keynote speaker and advocate for underrepresented groups. Thank you.
All right. So it is so fabulous to be here. Thanks again to Capital One and everyone that's put so much effort into organizing this conference. I'm so excited to be here, to be attending the conference. Also very excited to be speaking this morning. And specifically, I'm really excited to be speaking on this topic. I was thrilled when I found out that this was the talk that had been accepted because it's a talk that I've actually been wanting to give for quite a while. We create software, we are in this kind of every day, and it's sometimes easy to forget that we have lots of other people that we're working with to make our products happen. So I'm speaking from the perspective of a developer. I'm a software developer. And I need to do a lot of coordinating with my design teams, with people who are testing the app in order to get our product out to market. And so this kind of interplay between these three teams, three different concepts, is so crucial because none of us are really working in a vacuum, right? We have to coordinate and speak with each other to create something great. And this coordination between different types of people is hard, and it can slow things down a lot. But imagine if you could have effective and efficient communication between all of these teams, how much better your product would be. So I called out that I've been thinking about this concept for a long time, and I mean I've been thinking about it for a long time. The first time I started thinking about this idea of inter-team communication, I was actually 9 years old. So before I was a software developer, I was an actress. I spent my childhood doing musical theater. And when I was 9 years old, I was cast for the first time as the leading role in a show. I was Mary Lennox in a show called The Secret Garden. And I was so excited. I'd had speaking roles in the past, but this was the first time I was the lead. It was opening night, and I was nervous. I had the jitters. It was, normal opening night jitters. But there was something more. There were a couple scenes that I knew that we hadn't really practiced as much as we should have. I didn't feel very confident about them. But I figured, this is my first time in a lead role. There's so much to know when you're the lead, so this is probably normal. Well, we were halfway through the first act, and I was in a scene with me and two other people, a character named Martha and a character named Colin. And we just had started the scene, and I knew it was time for my line, but I had no idea what my line was. Now, this totally happens all the time in theater, and usually the other folks on the stage pick up on it. You ad-lib for just 30 seconds, you get yourselves back on track, and everything's good to go. But this was one of those scenes we hadn't really practiced as much, so I forgot my line. Martha wasn't sure how to get us back on track, and neither was Colin. So we were all kind of awkwardly up there ad-libbing, and there's like this threshold that you reach where the audience now totally knows that you're ad-libbing. We surpassed that threshold. It was pretty awful. So I'm silently panicking internally, and I remember that we always have a script backstage so that everyone can reference their cue lines and things like that. So I know exactly where this script is. The character I was playing, Mary Lennox, was like a spoiled brat. So I was like, I have the perfect idea. I'm gonna throw a tantrum on stage, totally in character, run off stage, grab the script, figure out where we are, and then come back on and everything will be fine. So I throw my tantrum, I'm stomping off stage, I see the script, I'm 8 inches away from it, and the woman who plays Martha grabs my arm and pulls me back on stage, and she says, "Mary Lennox, you can't run away from your problems." Oh my God. Oh, if looks could kill. So she thought I was just bailing completely. So of course, she was not gonna let that happen. But there was no way for me to communicate my plan with her. So I just looked at her. Oh. We continue ad-libbing for which seemed like eternity, but it was just a few more minutes. And out of the clear blue sky, Martha goes, "That's right, Colin," which was weird because Colin hadn't said anything. She said it again. "That's right, Colin. That's right, Colin." And then music started playing. And I realized that that line was a cue for the sound booth to turn on the music for the song that was supposed to be at the end of the scene. Thanks, Lord, we all did know the song. So we sang the song, and the scene ended, and the rest of the show went off without a hitch, other than the fact that we skipped about 5 pages of dialogue that never really happened that night. So, the rest of the show went fine, the subsequent performances, but you don't mess up that bad in front of several hundred people and forget it. For the rest of your life, you will never forget it. It's that thing where you're laying in bed at night, your mind is going through the highlight reel of all the stupid stuff you've done in your life. That one is always there. And since I was 9 years old, I've replayed that moment and asked myself, what happened? What could I have done to prevent this, and what went wrong? And I think the first thing was I knew deep down that we hadn't practiced this scene enough. But I made the assumption that the director knew best for us, that she had seen us perform the scene in practices, and she felt like it was good enough. I thought that that was fine, but what I should have done is listen to my gut instinct and know that I was seeing this from a different perspective as her. I knew for a fact that my team of co-actors, we were not ready to perform this scene live. And I should have proactively gone and asked her, or just rounded up my teammates and said, let's just run through this on our own a few times. And the other big one was Martha. She had the understanding of the sound crew, of the light crew. She knew what the cue lines were for the different pieces of the show. She wasn't just doing her job as an actor. She knew how her job overlapped with the other different teams around her. And ultimately, that was what saved us, because we were kind of drowning and we needed the help of another team so we could reach out. And she knew how to reach out. So this concept of inter-team communication and understanding where your teammates are coming from, it applies in like every aspect of life. And I've always taken this lesson with me in my work as a software developer, the crucial importance of understanding where your other teammates are coming from, where your other departments are coming from, and the importance of interacting with them in a really clear and meaningful way. Now, when we're creating software as a developer, this is kind of like a basic flow that we like to go through. Okay, I get my designs from my designer, I start my software, I finish my software, and then we launch the product. Yay! But we all know this isn't really how it goes, because once you start development, you are going to have questions for your designers. And sometimes you need to go back to them and they need to update the assets or update the mocks and send them back to you. This is like a very natural way that we do software, but you know, it sort of can be a little bit frustrating. This small iteration, this small feedback loops are really important because we don't want to force ourselves to do waterfall development. It's important to have these conversations and change and be adaptive, but how many times are you having these conversations? And do you really need to be having so many conversations? In software development, we talk about this concept of boilerplate code, right? Stuff that like we just don't want to even type, so we type one letter and hit enter, and Android Studio populates like 15 lines for us. It's the stuff that we don't need to type every single time. Well, what if there's boilerplate conversations that we're having with our design teams? We don't need to be having those conversations every single time. Why not free up space for really meaningful conversations and find a way to shift those boilerplate conversations elsewhere? I read a great article by a man named Ramit Sethi a couple years ago. He's sort of a entrepreneur, personal finance, follow your dreams, career, inspirational, like kind of guy. And he writes some really interesting pieces. And he wrote a piece about barriers, what he calls barriers. And he had this hilarious story about his mom cooking him this awesome homemade meal. She'd wrap it up in a bunch of plastic bags and send it home with him. And then even though he was excited to eat the food, he would just let it sit in his refrigerator, and he didn't know why that was. And one day he realized he's so lazy that he opens up the fridge and sees that he's got to like untie all these plastic bags, and he's like, oh, so much work. So then he just never ate the food. So he was like, next time my mom gives me food, I'm going to take it out of the bag right when I put it in the fridge. And lo and behold, then he was able to eat the food for the rest of the week. And he talked about this idea of recognizing that when you want to do something and you're not doing it consistently, there's a barrier in your mind that's subconsciously like triggering the fact that you're not doing this thing. And I think that, you know, it seems really obvious when you say it like that, like, oh, just remove the barrier. But when I started thinking about life and my career in this way, it was actually pretty mind-blowing, and it really was a game changer. To think about where you want to go and identify one barrier, remove it, and then try and get there. And if you still are blocked, remove another barrier. So this, I didn't take this picture, but this is actually from I-70 near Glenwood Springs. It's a couple hours away from where I live. In 2010, we had a huge rock slide, and rocks completely covered the highway, so I figured that was a good choice for this piece about barriers. So when we're talking about barriers when it comes to designer-developer communication, what are some barriers? Well, I think one of the barriers is that we don't have a good way to communicate this boilerplate stuff. I've worked with designers in the past who have given me beautiful mocks, like in a PDF, and I've spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out what these margins could be, what the text size could be, and you spend so much time and energy trying to figure that out, and it still never looks quite like it's supposed to look. And then you ask them, and there's like a ton of back and forth, and like, oh, this in pixels. Oh, well, in Android we do DP. So like, what's the DP of this? Well, oh, I don't really know, and like, let me go look it up, and I think this one is this size. No, stop. Stop all right now. We have started using a tool that is so cool, and it takes care of a lot of this for you. It's called Zeppelin. It does cost, but I feel like it's very modest for the enormous performance lift you get for using it. Designers will create their mocks in Sketch or Photoshop or whatnot and import them into Zeppelin. And then as developers, you can access the mocks in this tool. And you can hover over any item that you want. You can click on it. You can see the size that it's supposed to be, the margins between other elements. It's phenomenal. I've also worked with designers in the past who'd given me PDFs that were completely annotated, and it was amazing. But I only ended up using about 30% of their annotations. And so that was like a huge waste of their time to do every single annotation by hand. Zeppelin takes care of all of that for you. Now, instead of reaching out to the designer and asking them, what size should this button be, and waiting for them to get back to me and having this huge, long ordeal, I can just open up Zeppelin, take a look, and see what it is. Another thing that I think is really important to eliminate these boilerplate communication things is having a style guide. So I like to think of a style guide as a contract between a design team and a development team. And the design team says, hey, 95% of what we put in the app is going to follow these guidelines. And the development team knows that in 95% of situations, they can just go look at the style guide to get the answers they need instead of reaching out to a person, having a conversation about something that should have been set as a baseline from the get-go. So a really good style guide is concise, but detailed. So that's kind of a hard mark to hit, but let me give you some examples from a style guide that I really enjoy working with. So I think this is one of the big ones, is a color palette. So I have worked in situations before where we have like 15 billion different types of green, and it's like, I don't even know why we have pretty much every shade of green being defined in our app, but for some reason we do. So here we have our two brand colors, a green, a pink, and then a set of grayscale components. And this helps to keep the designers on track to make sure that they're aligning everything with these brand guidelines. It helps keep us in track. And my favorite part is we've removed the conversation about colors from these hex values, which are not human friendly, into words. So like that top color, it's called lightest green. When someone says lightest green, I don't have to guess by what they mean. And did you mean the lightest green that was like C5, or did you mean the lightest green that was like C6, or which one are you talking about? No. Everyone knows what we all mean by lightest green. And the cool thing about this is you are now able to communicate these things with your design team and your iOS team. Everyone just defines this as a style in their code, and for the rest of the life of this application, you can just use the English name to talk about this. This also is great to have your text in your style guides. For example, if you've got something that's constantly recurring in your app that's Roboto, size 14, white, and bold, why not give it a name, title text? Now, in the style guide, you've defined title text. So for mocks that you get from the design team moving forward, they can just call out, oh, these all need to be title text. And everyone knows what you're talking about. Again, just define these in your styles.xml, and you never have to remember what the specific requirements of this are. You just call it by its name. Another thing that I've found that I've constantly had conversations about in the past, boilerplate conversations, is about these two items, zero state and loading. I feel like when you get a mock, it's always, populated in like its ideal situation, right? But you don't get a call out as to what it's supposed to look like while you're waiting for that data. You also don't get a call out for what it's supposed to look like when there is no data. And I feel like this has happened so many times. We're literally about to push a feature, at past places I've worked, and we're like, oh shoot, what's supposed to happen if there's nothing in this list? And then it's like this mad scramble, and the developer makes a judgment call and throws something in, and then your app is full of all these things that like don't really align. So why not just define a default loading and a default 0 state in your style guide? That way your developer doesn't have to explicitly ask and reach out to you every single time. Then a user will see something that's like on brand, that feels like it belongs in your app. And if you want to do a custom piece for later, you can add that in, but at least you don't have to ship something that feels disjointed from the rest of your app. Here's another one. The mock is always going to be this kind of static state of a page. But what happens when you press the button? What happens when the button is disabled? These things are all, it's overkill to define, 15 different screens in your mocks of all the potential states that this screen could be in. So why not define things like button states in your style guide? That way, as a developer, I can just see that this green button is here in the mock and just check the style guide to see what the state of that button is. So speaking of states, what happens if you have an icon or an icon button that needs a press state, and your designer has only provided you the asset for the enabled state? Well, first off, you realize, oh shoot, I need the press states. So then you go to your designer and you say, hey, I need those press states. They're like, okay, cool. So they go back to their workspace, they create and export the press states, which are usually just a change of color. They hand those assets off to you, you get them from your designer, you spend a lot of time moving each PNG into each individual density folder, and now you have press states. So this is a lot of steps for something that is seemingly quite simple, a split-second occurrence in your app. So all of these items in red are frustrating because you are now waiting on someone else to finish something for you, or waiting on their time. They're also frustrating to the designer because they had to context switch out of what they were working on, which is probably the next feature for you. And now they've got to pull themselves back into this old feature that they thought was finished. And so you're kind of wasting their time a little bit. So what if I told you that you could eliminate every one of these steps and even eliminate that step? So we talk a lot about vector drawables in Android and how awesome they are for reducing the size of your APK, but what about reducing the amount of the boilerplate communication that you have to go through with your design team in this situation? So if you're using vector drawables and you realize that you need a press state, this is all you have to do. You copy paste the original icon SVG, you open up the code, and you modify the fill color of the element. Ta-da! That's all you have to do. Because the drawable is code, and you have control over that. So that feedback loop has become like so tiny, it's not even a feedback loop anymore. It's just you asking the designer potentially what color it should be. But really, if you have a good style guide, you already knew the color anyway. So a note about this SVG Vector Drawable thing. So in Android, we have this concept of vector drawables, which is actually a subset of the scalable vector graphic protocol. So sometimes you'll get an SVG from your designer, and you import it, and it looks totally wonky in Vector Asset Studio. And that is so frustrating. I wish that there was like a plugin that designers could use that was like, only export this so that it's compatible with Android, but it doesn't really exist as far as I know. So one of our designers was getting really frustrated by this, and he said, if you get an SVG that you can't import, send it back to me, and I'll play around with it. And so he started playing around with these SVGs every time we'd send them back to him. And he started noticing certain patterns in the way that he was building the asset that caused it to be exported to an SVG that was too complicated for to be able to be implemented. So he asked a Android developer to come help him install Android Studio on his machine and get Vector Asset Studio running so that he could import the graphics himself and see if they were acceptable. So this goes above and beyond the call of, a designer from my perspective. It was incredible that he was doing this. And if you want your designer to do something like that, you need to go above and beyond the call for your designer. You need to be a relentless advocate for your designer's vision. I feel like we spend a lot of time talking with our designers about, hey, this is impossible for me to do. This is too hard. This is iOS. How many conversations do you have with your designers that are just about like negative things? How many times do you ask your designer, hey, I really want to make sure that I'm implementing your vision for this. Is this what you expected for this screen? I found this weird edge case that we hadn't talked about in any of our meetings, and I made this judgment call. Do you like the way this looks? You need to make sure that you are having these kinds of conversations with your designer. I sent out a survey to folks around the world before I gave this talk to get some feedback on how people build software. And I asked people at the end a free-form question. If I could do one thing to make my product better, it would be, and the thing that everyone said overwhelmingly was something like this: spend more time testing. It was almost unanimous. Everyone who wrote in this box mentioned testing. So if we think about testing, well, there's two types of testing. What I like to think of as pre-implementation and post-implementation. So pre-implementation would be before I wrote any software, and post-implementation would be, well, this is when I'm writing the software or after I've written the software, not like post-production, but post-implementation of software. So let's take these two and kind of figure out what the deal is here. So what's the barrier to pre-implementation testing? Well, I think the hint there is right in the way that people answered the question. I wish I had more time to do testing. So why is it that people think that there is not enough time to do this pre-implementation testing? Well, when you read about it, it sounds like it's a huge ordeal. Okay, you've got to block out a conference room for an entire day. You've got to have at least a couple people give up their day working on regular feature work to do these user interviews to understand what user preferences are. You've got to find the people on Craigslist or however you're going to source them, which is very difficult. You're going to have to bank on the fact that some people are not going to show up anyway. You're going to have to take a lot of good notes or set up a camera and then regurgitate this information. And there's like a huge amount of work that goes into user testing. And I personally think it's enormously valuable because you want to figure that stuff out before you spend time building your product. But sometimes for smaller pieces, you feel like it's not really justifiable to have a whole user testing day, but you wish you could get user feedback. A tool that I am really impressed with is called Usability Hub. It's an online service. It does cost, but I think it's well worth the money. And you can update mocks and upload mocks, and then pick from a pool of real people. You can funnel your demographics to be what your user base is, and you can have real people come in and test these mocks. And it's very simple, so you can put up a screen and say, where would you click if you wanted to find a list of books? And then you actually get like a heat map of all the different places that people tried to click. People can write in comments about your design. You can even test things as simple as a button or specific copy and ask people which one makes more sense. You set this up and you can run it for however long you want, and it's running while you're doing other things. And then at the end of this test, you get a nice report about what people thought. So it's a great way to have this user testing without investing an enormous amount of time for smaller pieces. Another awesome tool that I recently found out about is called Marvel. So we all wish that we could have gorgeous, realistic, clickable prototypes, but sometimes you just don't have time for that. But it's still worth it to user test your idea. So Marvel is an app that allows you to literally take screenshots and mark them as clickable areas and link these screens together and run it full screen on your app so it really feels like you're running an app. So it took me about, seriously, start to finish, 6 minutes to do this little two-screen app that I drew, and it was running full screen on my phone. This is a great way to kind of hash through some ideas because it feels like you're getting a lot more out of it when you're actually using it on a phone like you would an app. The other types of testing, post-implementation testing or during testing, unit testing, integration testing, we talk a lot about these. People tend to focus more on unit testing, but I think integration testing is really important as well, so you don't end up with a situation like this. Obviously, all of these unit tests were passing, but the final implementation was not passing. So what are the barriers to these types of testing? Well, again, I think it comes down to time. So what does that mean? So just a quick story. When I was a kid, I played the piano, and my mom made me practice for 45 minutes every single day, because that's how you get better, and I did get better. But then I grew up, and I moved out of the house, and I became an adult, and I got doing a bunch of adult things, so I just didn't have time to practice the piano. But my whole life, I'd always said, you know, before I die, I want to learn this song. Before I die, I want to learn this song. And I kept saying that to myself. And then it was like, wow, I've been out of the house for like 5 years, and I've never even like opened up this music. When your goal is like someday we'll get around to it, you just never get around to it. So I finally was like, okay, by the time I'm 60 years old, I will know how to play this song. So on that really long timeline for me, how do I get there? So I was like, you know what? I will spend 5 minutes every morning practicing this song. And so I'd eat breakfast, I'd sit down to the piano, and I'd practice for 5 minutes. And I felt like a total moron, because I was used to practicing for 45 minutes. I was like, 5 minutes is not going to do anything. And I started with like literally like a few notes at a time. It was so silly. I felt like this was not going anywhere. But would you believe that after 3 months, I could play the first page of this song? It like just happened. I was totally shocked. So when we think about this in terms of unit testing, what's hard about unit testing isn't understanding the test case that we want to run through in our minds. The hard thing about unit testing is understanding the frameworks that allow you to test in Android. How do I work with Roboelectric? How do I work with Mockito? How do I work with Espresso? What happens when I get to a piece of code that I really need to refactor in order to make it testable? This is going to take an enormous amount of time, and so people just give up. So I challenge you to take a new approach to testing and not just give up before you start, but just write 1 unit test a week. And tell your team that you're going to do this, because what's going to happen is if you submit a pull request with no unit tests, everyone's like, awesome, good job, and they talk about the code that you've written. No one ever says, where are your tests? But if you submit a pull request with 1 unit test, everyone's going to be like, well, why didn't you test it this way? Wait, where are the rest of your tests? And that's going to make you feel bad, and like you're never going to want to write tests. So if you tell your team that you're doing this and you write 1 test a week, I guarantee that slowly you're going to gain the knowledge and lay the foundation to allow you to test faster and faster and faster in the future. I asked this question to the QA engineers in test in my survey, and I asked them, what is the hardest part of working with developers? And they said the hardest part of working with developers is their lack of smoke testing. So what are the barriers to our lack of smoke testing? Well, we could say time, or we could say a mindset, that when we do a feature, we kind of test it and then we're done. But how many times do you test that feature after you throw it over the fence? Maybe never? You should become the most annoying and loyal and obnoxious user of your own app. When you're waiting for the train, when you're sitting on the bus, when you're waiting for a meeting to start, next time you want to open Twitter or Snapchat or Facebook or anything else, don't do it. Open your app instead and just start being in your app. Make sure that you use this time that you're sitting around for real device testing. As developers, we like to test on the emulator because it's easier for us to move faster, but your users are using your app in the phone. So you need to spend a lot of time playing around with the features that you've built already, and not just be focusing on the feature that you're working on right now. We spend a lot of time testing in the emulator, so we need to ask ourselves truly, what is an emulator good for? An emulator is good for typing things quickly. It's good for making the phone massive so you can really zoom in and make sure you're implementing the design correctly. But it's also good for testing multiple API levels. I know this. I think most of us know this. But I found an interesting phenomenon is that people have their emulator, their favorite emulator, which sounds very silly, but it's totally true. You fire up your machine, you pick the same emulator every day, and only if someone reports a bug on a lower API do you open up that emulator. So I was like, this is dumb. Why do I do this? So I started trying to find the barriers, and I was like, well, I think it's because I only have 1 emulator created right now in Android Studio. So I bet the barrier is that I just don't have other emulators. So I set aside some time one day, I created an emulator for each of the API levels that we support, and then I continued to test on the same emulator every day anyway. So I said, okay, that was obviously not the barrier. Apparently, being able to remember which API I tested is too much of a cognitive load for me to think about one more thing. So I don't know if any of you guys had these when you were kids, or maybe now. I always wanted a pair of Day of the Week socks, but I was like, what if I had Day of the Week emulators? Now I don't even have to think about what API I'm testing. I don't even know what API I'm testing. I'm just going through the app on the Monday emulator. So I did this, and it sounds ridiculous, but I swear to you, it was a game changer. I don't even know that on Tuesday I'm testing API 19, but I just picked Tuesday. I don't even have to think about it. And I tell you what, holy cow, the first 2 weeks I did this, I filed more bugs than I feel like I've filed in the last 3 months. I found so many things just running through the app on these other APIs that we do support, but it's been not the best user experience possible. So I encourage you, as you approach your software work, as you approach your design and testing work, as you approach working with other teams, you think really hard about the types of barriers, because most of them are pretty silly like this. They're pretty small. And think about the types of boilerplate conversations you might be having, and work with yourself and your teammates to find ways that you can remove these barriers so that you can have more efficient and effective conversations with your team going forward. So I hope that you know that I am so passionate about this conversation about inter-team communication, different ways that you can look at how you're building software to make it so much better. And I am so interested to hear the ideas that you all have. So please come talk to me today and tomorrow. I would love to hear what you thought about these ideas, and I'd love to hear some of your own. Thank you so much.